Hey, hi there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Today I want to talk about pocket screws again. Sorry, not my fault. I have a new subscriber. He's been methodically going through all my videos, starting with the first one and working his way through, and he's up to the one about the strongest joint in plywood, which is basically the toenailing pocket hole screws. And he says he doesn't like to use pocket hole screws because when he tightens them down, they move on him. It doesn't stay right where he wants it. And it kind of took me by surprise, but it got me to thinking that he's probably not the only one that has that problem from time to time. I've had that problem, but I've since then really understand why it does it, and so it's not really a problem anymore as long as I take certain precautions. So let's talk about why it would do that. Why does it move? So if you take a piece of wood, and we'll do this pretty simple, but if you have a couple of pocket hole screws in it, and you have a pocket hole screw going in, they go in at an angle. So basically this thing is going through here about like, let's try this again. Okay. And it goes through here kind of like that. And so it's at an angle. The problem with that is it gives it strength in some ways, especially if you put pocket holes on both sides of the board. They're coming in at an angle in the toenails. But the real problem that you can have that he was talking about is, like here I have this line right here, and if I put this right on that line, and I put those two screws in there and tighten down, this board will actually walk that direction because the screw is going in at an angle. It actually pushes that board away from the line then. If I turned it around and had it lined up to this line, and I put them in from this side, when I screw them down, they would walk this way off the line. And so they inherently will not stay where you start the screws in. And if that position is critical to you, then you just have to do some simple things with it. Craig come out with two different jigs to solve this problem. And a lot of the times these work fine, and that's what I use. But sometimes you have to go a little bit different. Sometimes you have to be creative. It depends on what kind of pocket screw joinery you're doing, how you're putting these two boards together. So, real quick, if you don't know how to use these, there's lots of videos out there about how to use them. But the thing you want to do is that if you take a board like this, let's say, and you want to make a butt connection between the two boards, so you have the one board here, and you want to attach this board just like that. Make it flush on both sides. This one, all you have to do is take it, put it across the seam of the two boards coming together, and clamp it down, and that's not very tight. And then you take and you clamp it down. Now when I put those two screws in there, that board is going to go straight down because this is holding that board from shifting this way. If I try to tighten it down now, that board will want to walk away from me, and this flush edge would actually, this piece would be further back. If I turn it around this way and tighten it down, that board is going to want to come toward me, and then it would be not flush on both sides when I got done. So it's predictable where it goes. This helps keep it in alignment here. The other thing you can do is that if you're on a flat surface and you have two boards coming into each other, like so, and these screws are going in, you can take and either tighten down each board individually, like so, and tighten it down, and that will hold them flush against the table so that when you pull it together, it will stay flush. Or you could take just one and put it across that joint like that and put them in, and that'll help hold that straight. So that keeps it from moving if you're doing two boards this way. But the other type of joint that you use a lot is you put the board together in this fashion, like corner legs with two narrow boards. And this would be like a corner leg on a table. If you're doing cabinets and this is two pieces of plywood, this would be your side and this would be your top or your bottom. And so you would put them on this way, and of course it would be much longer if it was a cabinet. So when you put them on this way, and you want these boards to stay there. If I put it on like this, and if I don't put some kind of preventive thing on it, when I tighten those screws down, it's going to pull in to here. If I put them to the inside, and I do this, this board is going to walk out, and it'll be beyond this board here. You'll have a lip. And so it's critical that this is held in place exactly like it needs to be. If you're going to do this, just put the two boards this way when you go to put the screw on it, and fasten this down and just clamp this, and you can get that. The other thing you can do is if you want to put two screws in on this type of joint, you can use the other grip that they have. And you just take the round end, and it goes into one of the pocket hole screws. Then you line everything up, and you clamp it down. And that holds it so that when you put the screws in, everything will stay right put. Make sure you tighten this down to the table if you can. If you're doing this on a big piece of plywood, you have two pieces. If this was a big piece and this is going in the middle here, and you want it to remain straight and in place, he said that he has to, that's why he prefers dados, because that way it sets right exactly in place, and then he just glues and toenails it in with his brad nail, like Norm Abram did for years and years. But without that, if you do pocket screws instead, all you have to do is, again, you have to understand where is that board going to go when you tighten it down. If they're on this side, it's going to push that board that way. If I put them on this way, it's going to push that board this way. So if you have a line here, you have a place where you want that to go, then what you want to do is on the opposite side of where your screws are, you take another piece and line it up right on those marks. Then snug it down on each end. Like so. And obviously, the bigger the board, the different places that you're doing it on the board and that will dictate how you do this. So you have to be creative. But you want to put a backer board on here right on that line where you want that to set. The two screws on the opposite side, and it's butted up against your stop block. Line it up where you want it. Put your two screws in there. Then you can take this piece back off. That will hold that where you want it, and when you take it away, this is enough to hold this from driving it this way. It'll stay there from that point forward. So you just have to make sure that you lock it down so that when you push this and tighten it down, it's not going to shift in the direction that is predictable by whichever way that angle is going. So that's how you basically do it. It's not hard to do, but you got to do it. Holding it will not guarantee it to stay put. So if it's critical that it stays in one particular exact spot, you got to put a backer board on it of some way or a clamp. So the other thing I kind of want to talk about after the movement is 3/4 versus 1/2 inch and even less. I have here two boards. One is 7/16, one is a 1/2 inch thick, and this one is 3/4. If I put them all down on the table here, and I'm going to put the pocket hole downward just so you can see it easier. And of course, because they're different thicknesses, they're different heights here. But where the pocket hole comes out, the distance between that hole and this table, and so that surface here to the edge of that, where that screw comes out the end, that's always the same all the way across, whether it's a 7/16, 1/2 inch, or 3/4, or even 1.5 inches. I use pocket screws on 1.5 inches all the time. Usually if I'm doing something that thick, I almost always put pocket screws on both sides too to toenail it in. And that makes a really super joint. But with this in mind, if this is even, then all you have to remember that you can still do thinner pieces like this, I just drilled this with the standard drill bit, even though it's a 1/2 inch and they tell you to use the smaller screw. I don't. I just use these same ones. If I'm going into a 3/4 inch piece of material this way, I still follow the same rules. I look for it to line up. If I need to, I clamp a piece there to hold it because it still will walk. But once you get this piece where you want it and you lock it down, even though this is a 1/2 inch piece of wood, I am screwing into a 3/4. Therefore, that joint is just as good as if this was both 3/4 inch pieces of wood. So you don't need the micro jig screws in order to tighten put thinner wood together. Now, again, this is if this piece where the screw is going through. If you think about where the threads are going to be, and if I take the same here, and now I want to screw to a 1/2 inch board, that's when you have to pay attention that if you're going to use screws like this, so let's say I'm going to use a 1/2 inch here, and let's put a 3/4 inch piece here. Now if I put the screws in this way, the screw will go in, it'll actually go through a 1/2 inch piece of board, just ever so slightly. So if I lock this in here, let me try to get over my bench dog hole. And if you can see that, that's barely sticking through this, so it actually penetrated through the other side. To prevent that, instead of just putting the screw straight in to your 1/2 inch material, what you want to do is take that screw and grind the tip off just a little bit on your belt grinder, on something. Just grind off about a 1/16 of an inch. Then you take a new screw, you put this where you want it, and this one still has the good point, and you put that one in place and screw it down, but only screw it about 2/3 of the way in. And that way you've got a starter hole now. Then when you take the other screw and put it in, because it's shorter, now you can screw that in all the way and it will not come out the other side. So just remember that you just have to shorten them a tiny bit, drill a starter hole, and then use these. And you can go into 1/2 inch wood even with these. So even the 7/16, this is a 7/16 inch piece. Pocket hole screws on this side. If you turn it over, that screw hole is coming out right at this edge of the face of the board on the opposite side. So 7/16 is about the breaking point of where that screw is going to start showing up here. This actually broke off, chipped off. It was so thin that it chipped off that little tiny piece right there off of the board so that I could see the screw when this is screwed down in place. So you can do this, but you'll be able to see it. So can you do thinner wood with pocket screws? Sure. The big thing to keep in mind is where that threads are going to be when you're done. If it's going into a 1/2 inch material, you got to address the issue of shortening your screw a little bit, and you can still use it. So you can still only have to buy the one jig and one kind of screws. You don't have to buy the smaller set. I have them. I very rarely use them, quite honestly. Most of the time, this is what I do. So keep that in mind when you're doing screws into thinner wood. You can do that, believe it or not. The other thing I want to talk about real quick here is end grain, edge grain, and face grain. On plywood, you have your face grain, and then you have your edge grain here and here. So if you take your screw, your pocket hole, and you put it in this way, you're going to cross grain. The threads are going to go cross grain through the plywood. That's a strong hold. If you go this way, like this, now those threads are going into the edge. This joint is not going to be as strong. So basically what I'm telling you is that there's two ways to put two pieces of wood together. let's move that out of the way. And that is that if I take this piece here, have my pocket hole screws here, coming out the end of the board, and they're going into edge grain here, that's going to be a good strong joint because of where the threads are going into, and they'll be strong. If I turn that around and I put my pocket screws on this piece, and now this piece is going to accept those two pocket screws, I'm actually screwing into end grain. This joint is not going to be anywhere near as strong as the other way. So keep in mind where you put your pocket screws. Don't do it reverse like this. If you do, well, I take that back. You can do this. It'll hold. It just isn't going to hold near as strong as it is the other way. So keep in mind of where the angle that your pocket holes are going in at, and that'll tell you the movement. And think about, once the screw's in place, is that screw going to be in solid wood across the grain, or is it going to go into the end grain? And that's what you want to pay attention to, and try to avoid putting those threads into end grain anywhere. So if you take two boards that are pieces of plywood and you want to join them together with this kind of joint, can you do that? Yeah, you can do that. But this is actually not a very strong joint. If I was going to do this joint here, I would try to find some way to put screws in from both sides. That way, by them going in at an angle, that'll make that joint a little stronger. Also, I would always use glue on this type of joint to give it every bit of help that I can. Speaking of glue, that's the other thing that I do a lot that I wanted to bring up. When I do joints, if I'm doing a shop project or a project for outside around the house or something, and I'm doing pocket holes to join it, I don't ever use glue. And it doesn't really add that much strength to a joint like this. The amount of strength that you get out of this joint doesn't really increase all that much, believe it or not. When you put a joint where the end grain or the edge of the plywood is where the screw is going to go into, you need all the help you can get. Then you want to glue. The reason I don't put glue on these is that I've been known to actually take things back apart and throw it away. Like I make jigs and then I unmake them. And so that's why sometimes you'll see me take a board like this, join it on something, and you'll look and you'll see some pocket holes to nowhere on it. That's what it's about. I actually used this piece of wood somewhere else, and I had pocket holes here. Then I decided, took it apart, put it back in the rack, and when I went to use this piece, I had to drill these two for use, and these two I can't do anything with. But if it's a shop project, it doesn't matter. So I don't use glue with pocket hole screws. You really don't need it. Unless you want that to stay together and you know you're never going to take it apart. A good example is like if you're making something for somebody else or a gift or something like that. You might want to always use glue in those circumstances because chances are you're not even going to see that again, much less take it apart. So assume that you don't need it. But glue, it is optional when it's pocket screws. It's a very strong joint and the glue doesn't add that much to it. So you have to be careful of when to use glue and where those threads go. So basically there's three things you have to keep in mind here today that I was talking about. First and foremost, the joint moving when you fasten it down. Keep in mind the angle of that screw, and remember that that board wants to walk away from the side where the screw is. It'll walk away the other direction if you don't put something on the back side or clamp it. Also, keep in mind where these threads are going to reside once that joint is together. If I'm putting this together like this, that means that these threads are going to go into face wood, and that'll be fine. That will work. But if I take it and I put it together this way, where this is end grain, now when I put the screw in, it's going to end grain. Not very good. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind the angle of the screws so you can figure out where it's going to move to. Keep in mind where the threads are going to be when you're done. And keep in mind, if you have to shorten that screw when it's at an angle, keep in mind whether or not that screw is going to come out the other side. And if it's a thinner piece of wood, just shorten your screws down at the end and you'll be fine. So just wait. Just wait. Now she doesn't even wait till I get this done. She wants it now. She'll wait. Anyway, that's everything. I hope you understood what I was talking about. I hope you liked this video or you learned something here. If you did, please say so. Most importantly, though, please come back again because, as you can probably guess, I'm nowhere near done. So, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you again very soon.